You know, when a fire alarm goes off in a building, there is absolutely zero ambiguity about what is happening.
Right. Everybody knows what that sound means.
Exactly. I mean, the bells are ringing, the strobe lights are flashing, and everyone collectively agrees there is an immediate threat.
Yes, there is no debate. You just evacuate.
Right. And that is exactly what overt disrespect looks like. Someone shouting at you across a room, a direct insult, an undeniable physical threat.
It's loud and it's obvious.
Yeah, and society generally has built-in mechanisms to condemn it and protect you from it.
Because the threat is visible. Right. Which means your brain knows exactly how to categorize it and respond to it. You are dealing with a known entity.
But what happens when the threat operates more like carbon monoxide?
Oh, that's a chilling comparison.
I know, but it fits, right? It is silent, it is invisible, and it just doesn't trigger any of the standard alarms.
You don't even know you're breathing it in.
Exactly. By the time you realize you are being poisoned, you are already completely exhausted, second-guessing your own memory and wondering if you are just making it all up.
It is deeply disorienting.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking you on a mission to decode the silent, hidden language of disrespect.
It's going to be a crucial one.
Yeah, we are looking at what behavioral psychologists call latent disrespect. This is the subtle, plausible deniability behavior that drains your energy and makes you feel, quite frankly, like you are losing your grip on reality.
It is the kind of behavior that chips away at your psychological safety. Not with a sledgehammer, but drip by agonizingly slow drip.
Right. So to help you spot this hidden language, understand the actual biology of why it destroys relationships, and learn the specific psychological frameworks to disarm it, we have pulled a massive stack of sources today.
We really have. It's a deep bench of research.
Yeah, we're looking at behavioral psychology analyses on latent interpersonal disdain, Edward T. Hall's foundational framework of proxemics, Dr. John Gottman's decades of longitudinal relationship research, and contemporary sociological studies on workplace gatekeeping and microaggressions.
It's a lot to cover, but it's also interconnected.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. The sources point out that this invisible poisoning rarely starts with an insult.
No, it almost never does.
Right. It actually begins with an attack on how you perceive the world.
Yeah, in behavioral psychology, that initial wedge is referred to as emotional invalidation. It functions as cognitive erasure.
Cognitive erasure, that sounds intense.
It is, because in a baseline healthy exchange, respect is demonstrated by acknowledging the other person's internal state. You validate that they are experiencing a specific emotion, regardless of whether you agree with their conclusion.
Right. I tend to view this as a toxic Jedi mind trick.
A Jedi mind trick, I like that.
Yeah, because someone does something demonstrably hurtful, and when you finally gather the courage to bring it up, they don't apologize.
Right, they flip it on you.
Exactly. Instead, they hit you with, you're being way too sensitive, or you're overreacting to a joke, or the absolute classic, that never happened.
Oh, the denial of reality.
Yes. They are actively trying to overwrite your subjective reality.
The mechanism at work there is profound. They are treating your perspective as inherently flawed or irrational. By doing so, they position themselves as the sole arbiter of what is real and what is acceptable.
Which is a huge power play.
Exactly. And if we zoom out from a one-on-one dynamic, this form of erasure actually scales up to a societal level through a concept researchers categorize as microaggressions.
Right, and this is a term that gets thrown around a lot in modern discourse, but it was originally coined back in 1970, right, by Harvard psychiatrist Chester M. Pierce?
Yes, and then it was significantly expanded upon by psychologist Daryl Wing Su.
Got it. So how do they categorize it?
Well, the literature generally attempts to organize these behaviors into a taxonomy to make them easier to study. You have the explicit end of the spectrum called microassaults, which are intentional derogations.
Like what?
Think of a whispered slur or displaying an offensive symbol.
Okay, pretty clear cut.
Right. But then the waters get muddier with micro-insults. These are subtle snubs that are often awkwardly disguised as compliments.
Oh, like a backhanded compliment.
Exactly. A common example in the research is telling a professional from a marginalized group that they are surprisingly articulate.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the subtext there is awful.
Right. The subtext is the expectation of incompetence.
And then there is the macro version of that Jedi mind trick we just talked about, right? The micro-invalidation.
Yes. This is where someone's experiential reality is just completely negated.
Like the classic example Sue points out.
Right. Telling an Asian American who was born in the U.S., "You speak English so well." The underlying message treats them as a perpetual foreigner in their own country.
Now, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate because this specific area of the research is incredibly heated.
It is very debated, yes.
Right. How are we supposed to parse out if a comment like that is a genuine microaggression rooted in deep-seated bias, or just a coworker who is painfully oblivious and lacking in basic social skills?
It's the core question of the debate.
We need to look at this impartially. On one side, researchers like Sue argue these subtle acts are deeply tied to systemic prejudice, functioning as the new face of racism and causing cumulative minority stress.
And the data on that side does track the cumulative physiological toll. Repeated exposure to those interactions correlates strongly with increased anxiety and depression in marginalized groups.
But on the flip side, you have prominent critics, psychologists like Scott Lilienfeld and Jonathan Haidt, who issue strong warnings about adopting this framework too broadly.
Right, they have a very different take.
Yeah, they argue that training people to constantly scan their environment for microaggressions essentially promotes a cognitive distortion called mind reading.
Assuming you know what the other person is thinking.
Exactly. This is when you assume bad intent without actually verifying it. They suggest that treating every clumsy, socially awkward comment as a deliberate aggression can lead to emotional self-harm.
Which creates a difficult environment.
Yeah, it creates an overly punitive environment where everyone is walking on eggshells, assuming the worst of their peers.
Oh.
We are absolutely not taking sides here, but it is crucial for you, the listener, to understand that the interpretation of intent behind these slights is fiercely debated in the psychological community.
What's fascinating here is that, setting aside the debate over societal intent for a moment, the underlying interpersonal mechanism of these slights remains identical.
How do you mean?
Well, they rely on the perpetrator bypassing or ignoring your boundaries. When someone invalidates your reality or makes a careless comment about your identity, they are stepping over a psychological line.
Right.
But boundaries are not merely abstract mental concepts. They manifest in the physical world.
Yes. Edward T. Hall's framework of proxemics illustrates this beautifully.
It really does.
Proxemics is the study of personal space, and it reveals how physical distance dictates psychological safety. Hall essentially mapped out the invisible bubbles we all carry around.
He categorized them into 4 distinct zones.
Right. Break those down for us.
The intimate zone is 0 to 18 inches from your body. That is reserved strictly for family, partners, or close physical combat.
Close combat. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The personal zone is 1.5 to 4 feet, usually for friends. The social zone is 4 to 12 feet for professional or casual interactions. And the public zone is anything beyond 12 feet.
So when you visualize those overlapping boundaries, the concept of latent disrespect becomes remarkably tangible.
Exactly. It materializes as proxemic intrusion. This isn't just someone bumping into you on a crowded train. This is a dominance display.
Right, like the colleague who intentionally steps inside that 18-inch intimate zone during a casual office conversation.
Yes. They aren't doing it to be friendly. They're doing it to trigger your spatial anxiety and assert dominance.
Ugh, I hate that.
Another fascinating tactic identified in the research is the manipulation of vertical distance.
The hovering. We have all experienced this.
Oh, absolutely.
You are sitting at your desk, deep in focus, and a manager or a coworker approaches from behind and just towers over your chair while talking to you. They force you to crane your neck up to engage with them.
It is a deliberate, non-verbal assertion of higher status. By violating your body territory and forcing that physical asymmetry, they are communicating a clear hierarchy.
That they are in charge and you are subordinate.
Exactly. And interestingly, this spatial intrusion has evolved. We are seeing a massive surge in digital boundary violations that function on the exact same psychological principle.
Oh, yeah, like someone aggressively monitoring your read receipts, reading text messages over your shoulder, or tracking your location without explicit consent.
Yes, and they almost always mask this behavior behind the guise of caring or just checking in.
But practically, it is a profound dismissal of your autonomy. They're refusing to allow you the space to exist unobserved.
Because true autonomy requires the respect of both a person's space and their time.
That is a great point. Let's transition to time, because the study of time in nonverbal communication is called chronemics.
Chronemics, yes.
I always try to frame time as a non-renewable currency. Once you spend an hour, you can never earn it back.
It's gone forever.
Right. So why do behavioral psychologists classify chronic lateness, and we are talking about someone consistently leaving you waiting 15 to 30 minutes, Why is that a status display rather than just poor time management?
Well, when it becomes a chronic pattern, making you wait operates as an interpersonal power move.
Hmm.
It forces you to cede your non-renewable currency to their convenience.
Wow.
They are non-verbally communicating that their schedule, their priorities, and their life are inherently more valuable than yours.
That's incredibly arrogant.
It is.
Yeah.
And if this pattern goes unchecked, it creates a deeply toxic dynamic known as silent scorekeeping.
Silent scorekeeping.
Yeah.
So one person is basically running a covert ledger in their head.
Precisely. The perpetrator keeps a mental tally of their own perceived sacrifices to justify ignoring your boundaries moving forward.
Give me an example of that.
They might think, well, I covered for them on that project last month, so I have earned the right to keep them waiting for this meeting today.
Unbelievable.
It places the target in a constant, invisible state of interpersonal debt. You didn't agree to the terms, but the scorekeeper uses this imaginary ledger to continuously justify disregarding your time and space.
So when you take those individual behaviors, invalidating someone's reality, invading their physical space, and monopolizing their time, and you scale them up into a larger professional environment, the behavior mutates.
It really does.
It turns into a systemic monopolization of control, which the sources refer to as malignant gatekeeping.
It becomes an architecture of omission.
An architecture of omission. Think of a gatekeeper in the workplace like a toll booth operator on a bridge that everyone has to cross to get their job done.
Okay, that's a good analogy.
Right. There is good gatekeeping, obviously. An executive assistant who manages access to a busy CEO so the company can function efficiently is a necessary toll booth. They are keeping order.
Sure.
But a malignant gatekeeper is the operator who selectively changes the toll price depending on who is driving up, or intentionally gives you the wrong directions so you miss your destination.
Right. In the office, this manifests as the information hoarder who conveniently forgets to CC you on critical project updates.
Or the credit stealer who presents your data as their own.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of a malignant gatekeeper is to erode psychological safety within a team.
And psychological safety is the foundational belief that you can speak up, share an experimental idea, or admit a failure without the fear of being humiliated or professionally punished, right?
Yes. Gatekeepers maintain their artificial authority by keeping that safety incredibly low, primarily through a tactic called interactional control.
How does interactional control actually play out in a standard meeting room? It sounds a bit abstract.
It is highly observable if you know what to look for. It involves frequent, calculated interruptions.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah. It is the person who subtly raises their volume and speaks at a faster cadence, specifically to prevent anyone else from finding a natural pause to enter the conversation.
They just bulldoze the room.
Right. But perhaps the most psychologically damaging tactic under this umbrella is selective eye contact.
Using eye contact as a weapon.
Yes. In a group setting, the gatekeeper will make a deliberate point to hold sustained, engaging eye contact with everyone in the room except the specific person they are targeting.
That is so passive-aggressive.
They utilize total gaze aversion to render that target socially invisible.
It sounds utterly exhausting for the target. They are trapped in this dynamic where they are physically present but relationally erased.
And the sources also highlight the kiss-up, kick-down dynamic.
Right. This is the peer who is incredibly deferential and charming to upper management. But the moment the boss leaves the room, they turn around and ruthlessly gatekeep and dismiss their subordinates.
The result for the target is a chronic state of hypervigilance. You spend all your mental energy scanning the room, trying to decode the subtext, and constantly adjusting your own tone to avoid being sidelined.
Which has to take a toll.
A massive one.
Yeah.
Over time, this creates a toxic buildup. When all these behaviors, the emotional invalidation, the spatial intrusion, the interactional control, when they calcify over months or years, they mutate into the absolute ultimate relationship killer.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at Dr. John Gottman's longitudinal research.
Gottman is foundational here.
He is. He is legendary in the field of psychology for being able to predict relationship failure, specifically divorce, with over 90% accuracy based on brief observation.
It's an incredible statistic.
It really is. He identified the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for relationships: criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and the most lethal of them all, contempt. Contempt is the single most accurate predictor of a relationship's demise. I view it as a psychological pathogen that infects the entire dynamic.
A pathogen is the perfect way to describe it. Contempt is fundamentally distinct from criticism.
How so?
Well, criticism is an attack on a person's character or actions. Contempt, however, is anger mixed with deep disgust.
Disgust, that's a strong word.
Yes, it is fueled by long, simmering negative thoughts. Crucially, contempt is an attack launched from a position of relative superiority. The person expressing it doesn't just feel angry, they view you as beneath them.
The physical manifestation of this is what I find so fascinating. Behavioral scientists track specific facial muscle movements using a system called action units.
Right, the coding system.
Yeah. The universal cross-cultural sign for contempt is Action Unit 1014. It is the unilateral sneer.
Unilateral sneer, yes.
Imagine you are mid-sentence trying to explain a vulnerable thought and the other person's face shifts. Only one side of their lip is pulled up and tightened into this fleeting asymmetric smirk. Or they deploy Action Unit 64, which is the classic dismissive upward eye roll. Experiencing that sneer is devastating.
It is devastating because your body is reacting to it as a literal threat to your life.
Wait, I need to push back on that. A facial expression triggers a biological survival response. That sounds extreme.
It seems extreme until you look at evolutionary biology. Humans are pack animals. For early humans, social rejection and ostracization literally meant death by exposure or starvation.
Oh, I see. We couldn't survive alone.
Exactly. We are wired to perceive social disdain as a survival threat. So when your amygdala fires upon seeing that sneer, it triggers a massive release of cortisol, the stress hormone.
Wow.
If you are chronically exposed to this contempt, that sustained cortisol actually begins to suppress your immune system. The research shows that people in highly contemptuous relationships physically contract illnesses more often.
That is mind-blowing. And psychologically, the target experiences what Gottman calls flooding.
Yes. You become so overwhelmed by your own physiological stress response, your heart rate spikes, your breathing shallows, that your prefrontal cortex shuts down.
You literally can't think straight.
Right. You can no longer engage in rational dialogue. You just stonewall to protect yourself, and you withdraw completely.
And then the entire relationship slips into a state of negative sentiment override. This is the point of no return where the pathogen has taken over. Even a totally neutral comment like, "Did you buy milk?" is perceived through a lens of hostility as a vicious, loaded attack.
Yes, the lens is permanently skewed.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If contempt is this lethal and latent disrespect is draining your cortisol, destroying your psychological safety, and making you feel invisible, how do you actually fight back?
That is the big question.
Yeah, how do you reclaim your physical and psychological space without being accused of overreacting and giving them more ammunition?
The very first step is entirely internal. It requires a cognitive shift known as internal attribution.
Internal attribution.
Usually when we are targeted by this subtle disdain, our default reflex is to internalize it. We ask, what is wrong with me? Am I really too sensitive?
Right, we blame ourselves.
But behavioral psychology demonstrates that latent disrespect almost always stems from the perpetrator's own internal landscape. Their deep insecurities, their fear of irrelevance, or their desperate need for control.
So it's about them, not you.
Exactly. Shifting the attribution away from your own flaws and onto their emotional deficits takes the burden off of you.
It instantly strips away their power over your self-worth.
Yeah.
And once you have established that internal armor, you can utilize a practical framework called the PACE method, P-A-C-E.
It's a highly effective tool.
It is designed to help you assert boundaries and interrupt the disrespect without escalating the situation into a screaming match. Let me break down the mechanics of why this works. First, P stands for perceive.
Perceiving without reacting.
Right. When you experience the interruption or the sneer, you deliberately notice the behavior, but you force yourself to detach from the immediate emotional reaction. You observe it as data.
Which is hard, but necessary.
Very hard. Next, A is for analyze. You look at the broader context of the interaction. Is this a one-off misstep because they are under a deadline, or is this a chronic, calculated pattern of disrespect?
You're gathering context.
Yeah. Then, C stands for confirm. This is the crucial step. You gently validate your interpretation by asking a neutral question.
The wording here is so important.
It is. The sources offer a great script for this. You say, "I noticed you rolled your eyes just now when I shared my idea. Was there something about it that didn't sit right with you?"
The psychology behind that confirmed step is brilliant. By stating objectively what you observed without attacking their character, You bypass their defensive reflexes.
You're not accusing them, you're just pointing it out.
Yes, you force their prefrontal cortex to engage and take accountability for the nonverbal cue they assumed they could get away with.
I love that. And finally, E is for engage. You use specific I statements to describe the impact of their action on your ability to function.
Like saying how it makes you feel.
Exactly. I feel dismissed when I'm interrupted during a presentation. I'd appreciate it if I could finish my point before we move to questions.
It's clear and assertive.
Right. Perceive, analyze, confirm, engage. It slows down your amygdala and forces them into a rational conversation.
And if we look back at Gottman's research on relationships, he provides the overarching antidote to contempt itself, which pairs perfectly with this method.
What's the antidote?
To insulate a relationship against these behaviors, you have to actively build a culture of appreciation. It requires achieving a 5-to-1 ratio.
5-to-1?
Yes. During periods of conflict, successful couples and teams maintain 5 positive or neutral interactions for every 1 negative interaction.
That seems like a lot of work.
It is intentional work. You achieve this by utilizing gentle startups, which means stating a complaint without attaching blame to it and deliberately sharing daily gratitude.
Building a foundation.
You are building what Gottman calls a sound relationship house. When mutual respect and fondness are the established baseline, the occasional misstep or clumsy comment doesn't trigger an amygdala hijack.
That makes total sense. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Our mission was to decode this hidden language, and hopefully you now realize that interpersonal respect isn't just about adhering to polite etiquette. It is the literal immune system of your relationships.
It absolutely is.
By recognizing these subtle signs, from the spatial intrusion of someone hovering over your desk to assert dominance, to the lethal unilateral sneer of contempt, and the exhausting reality of interactional control, you are now fully equipped.
You have the tools now.
You do. You have the analytical tools like the PACE method to protect your boundaries, stabilize your cortisol levels, and firmly defend your self-worth.
But before we close this deep dive, there is one final critical tension we want to leave you to ponder on your own. If we connect this entire discussion back to the sociological criticisms of microaggression theory raised by researchers like Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning, they warn about the societal shift toward a victimhood culture.
Right. We touched on that earlier.
Yes. If we reach a point where we continually rely on HR departments, campus authorities, and online call-out culture to mediate every single subtle slight, every awkwardly phrased compliment, or every instance of gaze aversion, do we risk atrophying our own internal psychological resilience?
Oh, wow. That's a heavy thought.
It is an incredibly delicate balance to strike. How do you demand the absolute, uncompromising respect you deserve, while simultaneously maintaining the mental fortitude and grace to independently navigate a deeply flawed world filled with clumsy, imperfect people?
It is a fine line.
It is a fine line between protecting your peace and attempting to police the world. Something to think about the next time you hear that silent, invisible carbon monoxide detector going off in your head, or the next time someone steps just a little too far into your personal space.